I appreciate the opportunity to enter the debate for the first time in the Committee of the Whole House and to speak to Part 2, which refers to and deals with the establishment of the Rugby World Cup Authority. It's a pleasure to follow Jackie Dean, who was so interested in broadening out the debate. I appreciate that she wanted to go perhaps a little bit beyond Part 2, and I'm happy to speak to some of her concerns about why there was no minority report from opposition members on the Select Committee with reference to Part 2, and that is because actually the Labour Party supports Part 2. What we are concerned about is the fact that Part 2 there are good provisions in Part 2. However, there are no. Nikki Kay asks why there was no minority report, and she can continue to interject, and I'm happy to respond to her interjections. But if she would let me get to my point, the reason why there was no minority report for Part 2 is the Labour opposition actually supports Part 2, but Part 2 is undermined by the provisions in Part 4. Part 2 establishes the Rugby World Cup Authority. And the authority's role is as a body corporate sets out its functions and powers, and those include determining all applications, making recommendations to the Minister, and granting of urgent applications. Now that is a good role for the authority, and the problem is, of course, that Part 4 completely undermines almost the entire. You may as well not even bother having the authority, because Part 4 says the Minister can just override them and ignore them. So we speak in favour of this part, but we do highlight the fact that there are other sections of the bill which this is. Jackie Dean brought this into the debate. She wondered why Labour has a problem with this bill, and it is because this part, which is a good, valuable part of the bill, is completely undermined. I would like to refer specifically, Mr. Speaker, to Clause 9. 2, and that is the amendment made by the Select Committee. The original wording was the safety. One of the things that the authority has to take into account in the original wording was the safety of individuals participating in or attending the Rugby World Cup 2011. That has been amended by the Select Committee, and I think this is a positive move to read that the public health and safety are protected as far as it is reasonably practicable during the period of the Rugby World Cup 2011. And that is an important amendment made by the Select Committee, because it acknowledges the fact that the event of the Rugby World Cup will actually have an impact on New Zealand as a nation, on our community as a whole, not just, as the original wording said, on those individuals participating in or attending the Rugby World Cup 2011. It's a positive change. It's an unusual change for this government to support. I think it's fair, given that term public health and their general abhorrence for public health. But what concerns me is that while Part 2 has that provision in it, and the authority should be making recommendations to the Minister about what in practical terms can be done to ensure public health and safety, and no doubt the authority will be taking advice from organisations like the police, like in this case the fire service, probably like public health services, district health boards. Although all those organisations will be able to feed into the process and advise the authority, who can then advise the Minister can then turn around and say, no thanks, too difficult, too expensive, we will eschew public health and safety in the interest of expediency or in the interest of securing profits for sponsors. It could be any reason. The Minister, in fact, doesn't particularly need to give a reason, but in that way undermines what is a very, very good clause here in Part 2 of the bill. Like I said, I think it's a good amendment, because it does recognise that it's not just about safety, but it is about public health. When you get a gathering of people, as you will do with a tournament like this, You have to think beyond just safety issues in terms of alcohol, in terms of driving, in terms of... Mr Chair.
Nikki Kay.
Take a